German officers called American artillery impossible to live through, worse than the Eastern Front. It wasn't about bigger guns. This was a centralized system, quietly engineered in peacetime. Its most lethal component was deliberately withheld. Operation Cobra opened July 24, 1944. An unprecedented American carpet bombing began. 1,500 heavy bombers and hundreds of fighter bombers struck. The Panzer division lay directly underneath. Its commander, General Fritz Bayerlein, later estimated bombing caused half his casualties. Another 30% came from American artillery. These shells fell on survivors trying to reorganize. Other weapons accounted for 20%. Bayerlein's exact percentages were his own. His account matched operational records. Americans followed airstrikes or armored attacks. They delivered sustained, accurate, large-scale artillery. This prevented German formations from regrouping. Every time a column tried to form, fire found it. This pattern extended to medical statistics. The U.S. Army Surgeon General's office studied wound ballistics. Fragmentation, not small arms, was the dominant cause of battle wounds. This applied to both sides. Casualty data from 1944-45 showed fragmentation from artillery and mortar fire caused over half of all battlefield wounds. Many sectors saw substantially more. A typical German infantryman on the Western Front faced this reality. He was most likely hit by an American artillery shell. This shell wasn't aimed personally. It was called down on his patch of ground. This was artillery as the primary killer, not just support. Its true impact redefined warfare. The Germans had mastered mass indirect fire by late WWII. Colonel Georg Bruchmüller, Breakthrough Müller, developed highly coordinated fire plans. His methods marked the peak of WWII artillery science. The 1919 Treaty of Versailles altered German military structure. Germany was forbidden heavy artillery. Its army was limited to 100,000 men. The 105mm field howitzer was the largest permitted piece. For over a decade, the German artillery school survived in reduced form. It focused on the individual battery and its commander. Centralized coordination was largely set aside. The guns to coordinate simply didn't exist. Hitler repudiated Versailles in the mid-1930s. Heavy guns returned. The German army rebuilt its artillery quickly. But it built on 15 years of institutional habits. The battery was the unit of action. Its commander was king of his own fire. A second reason was simpler. Supply. German 5th Panzer Army artillery in Normandy fired at roughly 10% the rate of British artillery. German production could not meet battlefield demand. Wehrmacht quartermasters could not afford a battery commander to throw 12 rounds for a registration exercise. German fire missions were shorter. They were stingier. A typical German mission against a target might be 1 or 2 shots per battery. An American time-on-target mission committed 60 rounds. This happened across multiple battalions in under a minute. Even with theoretically equal guns, Germans lacked the doctrine. They also lacked the shells. Their historical inertia and logistical failures created a deeper vulnerability than any tactical error. This American system wasn't built in 1944. It was forged 15 years earlier. It began quietly in southwestern Oklahoma. A small group of officers worked in a school almost nobody in the U.S. Army cared about. Fort Sill in 1929 was a tired post. The Field Artillery School existed since 1911. Captain Dan Tyler Moore established it. He was Theodore Roosevelt's military aide. Moore had been sent from the German Field Artillery School at Göteborg. He was building an American equivalent. Budget cuts of the 1920s hit the school hard. Horses still pulled the guns. Manual doctrine mirrored 1918 Western Front tactics. Each battery commander spotted his own rounds. He adjusted fire by eye from a wooden tower. No system coordinated battalion fire. If a forward officer wanted 3 batteries to fire together, he called or rode to each. He gave data. He hoped it still applied. Most often, it did not. America, like every army, was fighting the previous war. Major Carlos Brewer arrived in the late 1920s. He had taught at Fort Sill since 1928. He became director of gunnery. Brewer was not flashy. He liked mathematics. He saw his branch's slowness. He observed its clumsiness in massing shells. He believed he could do better. He had no money, no special equipment, no political backing. He had a few junior officers. They shared his obsession. He had recent graduates. They could be persuaded to try new things. Brewer attacked the bottleneck, calculation. Every gun needs precise angle and elevation. These numbers depend on gun location, target, weather, propellant, barrel wear, a dozen other variables. In 1929, each battery calculated separately. Officers used slide rules. Brewer asked a rude question. Why compute separately? What if all calculation happened in one place? One officer in one tent, one office in one tent, one map, a small team of mathematicians. They would take the phone call, they would do the math once. They would send answers simultaneously to every gun. Brewer's department took 3 years. By spring 1931, they successfully demonstrated mass battalion fire. This used a new firing chart method. By 1934, under Major Orlando Ward, the system refined. A single tent, the Fire Direction Center, became an artillery battalion's brain. Gun batteries were its hands. Ward insisted on a key design. Any battery in range, regardless of battalion, could fire on any FDC-named target. Lieutenant Colonel H.L.C. Jones refined procedures further. He pushed them across the field artillery community. This overlooked school, starved for resources, became the birthplace of a military revolution. Its low-profile innovation was profound. No other army was doing this. The British, French, Soviets, Japanese, and Germans either devolved fire control downward, or they centralized only within a single battalion. The British independently developed a similar approach. This was in the North African desert in late 1941-42. They called it the Mike Uncle Victor and William Target System. A Mike target massed a regiment's guns. A Victor target massed an entire corps. By 1944 in Normandy, the British could lay down a Victor target. They put 1,000 guns on a single map reference. They synchronized using BBC time pip signals. The American innovation, alongside the British, was its Fort Sill FDC and firing chart. These meant almost anyone could call for fire. He didn't need to be a field-grade officer. A lieutenant or a corporal with math training sufficed. The FDC would mass fires from all batteries in range. This took minutes. By early war years, Americans had a name for this killing technique. They called it time on target. The idea was simple to state, difficult to execute. An ordinary artillery barrage rises in pitch. First shells arrive. Men hear them. Men dive for cover. Most casualties occur on the first few rounds. After that, a barrage can continue for an hour, doing little. A time-on-target mission didn't work that way. Shells from all participating batteries arrived simultaneously. This happened within a 3-second window. Batteries were miles apart. They fired different distances. There was no first round, no warning whistle, no chance to dive. Men heard the weight of battalions in the same instant. Casualties were spread across every man upright, sleeping, eating, or relieving himself. This weapon, honed by theory, was about to face its ultimate test in a desperate fight for survival. August 7, 1944. A boulder field on Hill 314, northern France. Robert Weiss, 21, a second lieutenant from Indiana, sat in a foxhole. His radio batteries already weakening. Beside him, his sergeant. Below them, in the pre-dawn dark, German tanks moved. Weiss heard them. Fog obscured his view. He knew they targeted riflemen of the 120th Infantry Regiment 2nd Battalion. These men were dug in with bazookas and mortars. Weiss had a calibrated map. He had a list of pre-calculated grid coordinates. He and Charles Bartz, another forward observer, prepared them. Corporal Frank Denius helped. Each coordinate had a number. Weiss would call a number. The 230th Field Artillery Battalion's Fire Direction Center, 5 miles back, knew where to send shells. Weiss didn't need to spot rounds. He didn't need to walk them in. He spoke a number. Fire would fall. In the next hour, 300 German tanks, the thick part of 4 panzer divisions, would enter the valley. Adolf Hitler personally ordered them there. Their orders: drive west to Avranches, cut the American breakout, isolate Patton's Third Army in Brittany, turn the Normandy campaign on its head. German divisions were not second-rate units. They included the 2nd SS Panzer Division Das Reich, also the 2nd Panzer Division, 116th Panzer Division, 17th SS Panzer Grenadier Division, Gurz von Berdingen, and elements of the 1st SS Panzer Division, Leibstandart Adolf Hitler. They moved since 1 a.m. in the dark, without preparatory artillery. Surprise was preserved. The American 30th Infantry Division, Old Hickory, had been in this sector just 5 days. Most men hadn't dug proper holes. Germans entered Mortain within 2 hours. They overran Weiss's battalion headquarters. They surrounded Hill 314. 3 rifle companies of the 2nd Battalion, plus observer parties, were cut off. About 700 Americans isolated. No resupply. No relief. No clear retreat. By all rules of war, those companies should have been captured or destroyed. This should happen by noon on August 7. They were not. A massive strategic gamble was about to collide with a small, isolated group of men. Their survival depended on a radio. The forward observer parties were the men's only direct line. Captain Reynold C. Eriksson, senior surviving officer, took command. The first major German attempt on the hill came August 8, pre-dawn. German commanders attacked in the dark. They believed American artillery would be inaccurate. They were wrong. Weiss and Bartz had plotted emergency barrage numbers. They plotted normal barrage numbers. These covered every approach and assembly area. Each plotted point had a number. When German infantry climbed slopes, Weiss didn't adjust. He called a number. The 230th FDC had the data. Rounds fell on German formations in the dark. No warning. On grids the Germans believed were unobserved. German night attacks broke. They failed to overrun the perimeter. By August 8 morning, Weiss and Bartz had secondary support. Foe parties on Hill 314 had priority access to 7th Corps heavy artillery. Their fire missions were not limited to the 230th's 12 guns. They called the corps FDC net. It massed fires from multiple battalions. Both 105mm and 155mm howitzers were used. Even heavier corps-level pieces were available. Calls were almost continuous for 4 days. Men on the summit saw 15 miles. Every German movement observed was called in. Assembly areas, road columns, firing artillery batteries, truck parks. The Corps FDC put fire where the lieutenants asked. Conditions on the hill were terrible. No food after day 2, almost no water. Radio batteries weakened steadily. Observers scavenged from the dead and captured. Germans tried to wipe out observers specifically. White phosphorus rounds hit the summit. Infantry assaults pressed the perimeter. German troops were within rifle distance of his foxhole. Robert Weiss called artillery directly onto his own position. The FDC, miles away, took the call without arguing. Rounds fell where he asked. He survived. Not all German infantry around him did. The hill held. The 35th Infantry Division reached the hilltop August 12. Of 700 Americans, only 357 could walk down. Weiss alone, by his own count, called 193 fire missions. Captain Eriksson and 4 company commanders received the Distinguished Service Cross. The 2nd Battalion, 120th, received the Presidential Unit Citation. The entire 30th Infantry Division wouldn't receive its citation for Mortain until March 17, 2020. This was almost 76 years after the battle. What happened on Hill 314 was not the result of an exceptional weapon, not an exceptional officer, not an exceptional unit. The men were ordinary infantry. They were from a National Guard division. They had landed in France barely a month before. The difference was the system. 2 lieutenants and a corporal with a radio acted as the trigger. They controlled an enormous distributed weapon. An ordinary system, developed in obscurity, transformed a desperate defense into an impossible victory. The corporal plotting barrage numbers with Weiss and Bartz was Frank Denius. He was 19 from Athens, Texas. Dennius had been a teenager months earlier. He was drafted from school. He landed in Normandy on D+3 with the 230th FA Battalion. He earned his first Silver Star July 17, 1944. He was promoted to corporal. At Mortain, he was chief of detail for Lieutenant Charles Bart's foe party. He received 3 more Silver Stars before war's end. These were for actions in the breakout Low Countries and Germany. 4 Silver Stars in less than a year. He was a quiet, unflashy young man. He finished the war as a staff sergeant. He went home to Texas. He attended law school at the University of Texas. He practiced law in Austin for decades. He became a great benefactor of the University of Texas. Its indoor practice field is named in his honor. He died July 29, 2018, aged 93. Dennius's significance was not just personal. He represented what made the American artillery system work. The FDC could only mass fires as fast as the man at the radio. That man had to read a map under shell fire. He had to identify a grid. He had to calculate a correction in his head. He had to transmit a coherent fire request. No wasted syllables. Americans had many men who could do this. They were not, in the main, professional soldiers. They were teenagers and young men. From Iowa farms, Pennsylvania steel mills, Texas oil fields. They came through an American public school system. Basic geometry and decimal arithmetic were drilled into almost everyone. Most grew up with country store credit ledgers, farm budgets, machine shop tolerances, baseball box scores. Numbers were not strange to them. Numbers were tools. They had used them since childhood. The Wehrmacht had observers, and very good ones, but they lacked a system that could translate an observer's request into simultaneous fire from several battalions in minutes. Individual skill was amplified by an architectural difference, a distinct cultural foundation that enabled rapid, coordinated destruction. The Army Historical Foundation compared American and German artillery. The German Army's typical response time was 10 to 12 minutes. This was for a call for fire on a target of opportunity. American response time, even early in the war, was often under 3 minutes. By 1944, it was sometimes under 1 minute. This was for pre-registered targets like those Weiss plotted. The difference was not equipment, it was architecture. In autumn 1944, the same system met Germans in a different country. The Hurtgen Forest, a 50-square-mile patch of dense fir woods. Deep ravines. Steep slopes south of Aachen. The American First Army pushed through. This was part of the effort to reach the Rhine. The fighting lasted from September 1944 to early February 1945. It became the longest single battle for the U.S. Army. It was one of the costliest. Several American infantry divisions were ground down inside the forest. These included the 9th, 28th, 4th, 8th, 78th, and 83rd. Germans defended prepared positions in dense woods. The woods masked observation. They limited armor use. Germans fought from log bunkers and well-dug foxholes. Overhead cover sheltered men from Eastern Front fire. What Americans brought was new. What Germans hadn't faced in Russia. The canopy itself became a weapon. American artillery fired standard high explosive shells. They used point-detonating contact fuses. Rounds passing through upper branches often detonated. This happened 20 to 100 feet above the forest floor. The result for men in foxholes below was an accidental airburst. Steel splinters from the shell rained down, sharpened wood splinters from shattered branches too. These came straight down into positions. Positions dug to defeat ground-level explosions, not prepared for fire from above. Ernest Hemingway described the experience. He was embedded with the 22nd Infantry Regiment. He called it passional with tree bursts. Colonel Charles Truman, Bucknam 22nd Regiment commander, summarized the asymmetry bluntly. His troops combed tree bursts from their hair. The German lay snug in his hole. The German lay snug only as long as the canopy held. As bombardments continued, upper branches were torn off. The protective effect of trees diminished. German infantry positions did not improve. Fire missions kept arriving. Foxholes themselves were now exposed. VT-fused shells reached field artillery in late December. Airbursts, once accidental, became deliberate. Gunners chose the height. No tree line mattered for protection. Only burst height and the man in the hole below. The very environment the Germans relied on for defense became an instrument of their destruction. Adapt or perish. The variable time fuse was called the funny fuse. It was a tiny radio transmitter and receiver packed into the nose of an artillery shell. It detected its distance to the ground. It detonated the shell at a preset height, usually around 30 feet up. Its development began in 1940, a partnership between British scientists and the US Navy. By 1943, the Navy used it against Japanese aircraft. The cruiser Helena scored the first known combat kill. This was January 5, 1943, against a Val dive bomber off Guadalcanal. The Pentagon, however, refused to release the fuse for land use in Europe. They feared an unexploded shell. It might fall into German hands. It could be reverse-engineered against Allied bombers. Through spring, summer, and autumn 1944, Allied infantry suffered. In Normandy, Hurtgen, and Aachen, the VT fuse was authorized for anti-aircraft use over land in Britain. Against V-1 flying bombs, from late October, for Antwerp's anti-aircraft defense, it was not authorized for ground attack against German troops. That changed December 16, 1944. The German Ardennes offensive began. Colonel George Axelson, commanding the 406th Artillery Group near Monschau, broke the embargo. He ordered his guns to use VT shells. They had been quietly shipped to Europe in advance. On December 19, Eisenhower formally requested clearance for ground attack use. On December 21, restrictions were lifted. About 200,000 VT-fused shells, codenamed Posit, were fired. This was into the German offensive in the weeks that followed. The effect on German infantry was immediate. A standard contact fused shell exploded on impact. It dissipated most blast and shrapnel into the dirt. A man in a foxhole was reasonably safe, unless it landed almost exactly in his foxhole. A VT-fused shell did not land. It exploded above the foxhole in the air. Shrapnel from the burst traveled downward in a cone. The man in the foxhole, no matter how deep, was inside that cone. Trench cover, log roofs, overhead protection. German infantry relied on these against Soviet shelling. None worked against VT airbursts. The explosion happened above the cover. This delayed technology, once released, promised to redefine survival on the battlefield. Its true test was imminent. General George Patton wrote to Major General Levin Campbell, Jr. This was after the Battle of the Bulge. He wrote about the new fuse's effects. His letter is one of the most quoted commander assessments of any single weapon. Patton called the funny fuse devastating. He described one mission. A German battalion attempted to cross the Sauer River near Echternach in late December. The mission killed 702 men by his count. He believed other armies would eventually obtain the fuse. Methods of land warfare would then be revised. He was glad Americans thought of it first. In another wartime letter, Patton put it simpler. He said the funny fuse won the Battle of the Bulge for them. This letter is in the Patton papers. The quotation is real. The most concentrated demonstration occurred at Bastogne. This was during the Ardennes campaign. It is best known to historians. The small Belgian crossroads town was defended by the 101st Airborne Division. Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe commanded. They were encircled. The German plan depended on taking Bastogne quickly. They did not take it. One reason: substantial artillery support inside the perimeter. This included the 321st Glider Field Artillery Battalion, 377th Parachute Field Artillery Battalion, 97th Glider Field Artillery Battalion, and 463rd Parachute Field Artillery Battalion. Also the towed tank destroyers of the 705th Tank Destroyer Battalion. The 463rd was unusual. It volunteered to McAuliffe. It reached Hemrel just outside Bastogne. It was inside the encirclement when Germans closed it December 20. The perimeter contracted. Artillery battalions inside had overlapping fields of fire. Whatever direction Germans attacked, multiple battalions could mass. By December 23, weather cleared. Ammunition arrived in quantity by air. By December 26, Patton's Third Army relief column broke through. It reached the perimeter. Gun batteries inside Bastogne had spent days dropping mass fires, increasingly with VT-fused shells after the embargo lifted. These hit every German unit that attempted to close on the town. The 26th Volksgrenadier Division, Panzer Lehr Division, and 15th Panzer Grenadier Division. They left battalion-sized formations dead in the snow. American fire control inside Bastogne was precise. The Wehrmacht had no answer. A thin defending force, properly anchored to a fire direction net. With overlapping artillery battalions, it could deny ground, even to a much larger attacker, by simply punishing every concentration attempt. The decisive battle confirmed a total systemic failure for one side and a complete mastery for the other. The most useful evidence of American artillery's impact is not a single statement. It is a body of after-action reports, prisoner of war interrogations, post-war interviews. Allied intelligence services accumulated these through 1944-45. The U.S. Army then expanded this into the Foreign Military Studies Project. Captured German officers, then POWs, were paid. They wrote monographs about their experience for the U.S. Army. These studies range from theater commanders to regimental staff officers. They are now held at the U.S. Army Center of Military History and the National Archives. Historians have worked through them ever since. Those documents show repeatedly the American artillery problem had no doctrinal answer for the Wehrmacht. It lacked the equipment to match. It lacked the supply of shells to imitate. And at the speed it was happening, it lacked time to learn. It is not that Germans at any level failed to notice. They noticed. Their reports described American fire patterns. They did so with careful, almost respectful, professional detail. The reports could not propose a counter that worked. By early spring 1945, German reports from the 15th Army area noted with weary precision, no method of countering American artillery had produced any consistent benefit. The most effective tactic was simply to disperse, to dig deep, to accept that any concentration of force longer than a few minutes would be detected and shelled. The American system had been an accident of peacetime poverty, an answer to a budget problem, a quiet experiment in centralization, conducted by majors at a forgotten school in Oklahoma. When it met the Wehrmacht, it had become something the Wehrmacht had no doctrinal answer for. Lieutenant Robert Weiss survived the war. He returned to Indiana. Later, he moved to Oregon. He founded a law firm. He practiced business and tax law for decades. Almost half a century after the battle, he wrote Fire Mission. It was published in 1998. He returned to Mortain more than once for anniversaries. Charles Barthes also survived the war. Frank Denius lived until 2018. The men of the rifle companies who held the perimeter, those who survived, scattered. After the war, they returned to ordinary lives. Most never wrote anything down. Hill 314 is still there. It is a small park now. A memorial chapel stands. Stained glass panels inside. Name the men. They held the position August 7 to 12, 1944. Traces of foxholes remain around the summit. The view on a clear day runs for 15 miles. It was a quiet experiment that changed everything.